we got a little off because I was doing the visit with Kyle last week, and now we're back in our usual homes, doing our usual stuff, and I now have a proper office to record the stuff in.
Do you?
I don't have a microphone or a camera, and I don't really think I need either one of those. Um, Namely because I don't want to invest a lot of money into this. I'm not saying that out of laziness. I'm saying this is a hobby. This isn't
Yeah,
something
it's
I'm
not a
going to lie to
job.
myself and I'm not going to lie to myself and tell myself I can make a career as a YouTuber.
Yeah, that's a pretty steep probability. As nice as it would be, I don't think if as I always say when I do my Twitch streams, like if it becomes a job, it becomes an obligation. If it's an obligation, it stops being fun.
You're on the cusp of reaching the top 5% of Twitch streamers. Because if you get an average of 5 viewers or more, then you are considered part of the top 5% of Twitch channels.
That's kind of hilarious.
Yeah, because there's that many shitty accounts on there.
Go figure. All right, let me.
And what I want to do with this one, we are planning on making an episode based around combining Werewolf and Changeling, because those two don't know it, but they're fighting the same enemy. And as similar as their goals are, I think it's very safe to say if you have the opportunity to put a Changeling in your game, put a Changeling in your game.
Yes.
But for this episode, Kyle, if you hear my microphone brushed up against my clothes or you hear any feedback through my microphone, immediately tell me.
All right, but for this episode, what we wanted to do is just kind of like go over some things that a potential World of Darkness storyteller might want to know, and get a little bit of insight on Johnny's creative process when it comes to storytelling.
What I want to do with this episode is demystify the difficulty of being a storyteller. It's not difficult. I want this episode to be titled "Being like Storytelling Isn't Difficult." That's why That's why I want this to be, because I hope I accomplish that by the end of this episode. If you're looking at being a storyteller, but you're apprehensive for whatever reason, you don't need to be. It's not as difficult as you think it is. I'm not going to say get over it like I do with some of my other episodes. No, like this is like me, Julian, trying to help you, saying you have nothing to be apprehensive about. Just do it. I mean, I did that when I was running D&D, where I just said, I really want to run a game. What's stopping me from doing it? Nothing. I'm just going to go ahead and do it. And now I've been a forever DM for, what, 2 years?
Yeah, pretty much. It's been a long time since you actually like sat down and been a character. That's only because I am likewise apprehensive about it, which that'll demystify it for me as well.
And I'm worried that I might have developed a complex, because whenever I'm a player in somebody else's game, I get a little bit like bitchy at times, and I keep my mouth shut whenever I know I'm about to start doing it.
Yeah. I mean, as far as my knowledge, you've been good about it, but like I haven't been a part of those other games.
Yeah, we're yet to see Fox run Warhammer 40k.
Well, I'm sure you'll keep me updated on all the fun things he has you doing. But given the fact that he and Dusty have been playing
Warhammer
Cyberpunk
without you.
Well, you know what? You go ahead, okay?
Yeah, because you're too chicken shit to try out Warhammer.
Yes, I am. I'm sorry. I'm full of Warhammer lore, or not Warhammer. I'm full of Werewolf lore right now. I don't have bandwidth for Warhammer.
All right. We can put a stop to this music. I will start with a little like mission statement, like thesis statement, or explaining what being a storyteller is supposed to be.
Okay.
That is World of Darkness's word for being a GM in this game, a game master or a dungeon master, depending on how you set it for D&D. I'm coming at this video with a approach that most of you who are watching this know something about tabletops already, and I'm going in with giving you like a little bit of credentials. Most of my stuff is D&D. I've been engaging with World of Darkness for about a year, and I'm not an expert. I'm a literally who. You can take everything I say and throw it in the garbage, but I think that for a game that's available to the public, and from what I've learned storytelling, and from running a chronicle beginning to end, and being in other people's chronicles beginning to end, I feel like I have something to say, at the very least.
Yes. And I mean, from my conversations with you as you visited, it's like the amount of lore, just raw lore that you had in your mind was baffling to me.
Typically, what I do whenever I run a game is whenever I'm making a new story or a new chronicle, I always think about what exactly do I want the overarching theme to be. This is just me. Because when we did Vampire, Kyle was in our Vampire game for this.
Mm-hmm.
And the overall theme of that game was lies and deception. That lies can do more harm to you than physical violence can.
Mm-hmm.
And from what you saw in that Vampire game, I think I pulled that point across.
Yes, I agree.
Considering that that was the first time I was playing Vampire with that group after 2 years of D&D. And what I wanted to do with that game was try to condition my players away from the D&D power gamer mindset, specifically 5th edition D&D. So you can, for anyone who knows our D&D editions, you know that that can be a little bit difficult considering that 5e starts you off very, very strong out the gate. And older editions of D&D, like 3rd edition, especially 2nd edition, you start off as literally nobody, and then you make a name for yourself as that game goes on. You're in an even lower position at the start of a vampire game. Or even after doing the starting stats, you might think your numbers are good, you haven't encountered an NPC yet. Because every fight we had in that vampire game could have become very deadly if you guys didn't think as you were playing.
Yeah. But thankfully, we had a
Yeah.
pretty solid group dynamic for the most part.
A lot of encounters in that game were based more around how can you avoid taking damage instead of how much damage are you going to deal.
Yes. That was been
And
my experience. Granted, I stayed out of the way of most fights after I almost got cut in half.
and surprisingly, you guys spec more into celerity than you did in fortitude.
Well, I mean that we saw from Tabitha, who had celerity, how powerful of a discipline that was, and given how much it adds to dexterity, since a lot of us used guns as our primary source of damage dealing, we felt that would be incredibly useful, both in avoiding damage and dealing damage.
And same thing with the games I ran for D&D that were original stories. The Friday game I'm a part of, we started that off with me running Ghost of Saltmarsh. And then around the fourth dungeon, we realized that none of us were liking Ghost of Saltmarsh as it was written. So they started asking me, can we get some original stuff from you since you say you're doing some homebrewery already? And I said yes. And as I was looking through it, I started looking at media I was watching at the time. And at the time, I was rewatching Devilman Crybaby for the second time. And as I was watching it, the idea just snapped to me. I said, hey, I got it. I've been doing a lot of encounters, random encounters involving dragons. So why don't we have a great dragon migration? Where the original plan was that a gold dragon was going to be the antagonist. But then I changed my mind partway through it and I said, no, let's make Bahamut the main antagonist. And let's flip the dynamic. Let me surprise my players that hell is still hell, but heaven is just as evil as hell is in the D&D game I ran. And you saw that where that went with some of my players because two of our players, their characters were Echo and Misfortune, and I'm not going to explain too much about them because this isn't about my games. This is just about you as a storyteller. Those two in that situation, I saw their characters change from their initial concept, and now Kyle knows as a guy who chains all of his D&D games together in one continuity, those two have become figureheads in my games where if I have a game that's in D&D, one of those two will get a mention at some point in the middle of a game.
Yeah, they've sort of been embedded into his own lore with the games he runs, which is really cool as a nod to returning players that yes, your actions did indeed have an impact in the world.
And looking at everything there is to do about World of Darkness, I would say when making your games, it's always good to have a villain, but the villain will never be the focus of your game. You want to focus on the players. The players are always going to be what differentiates you running a tabletop game from you writing fan fiction. If you focus too much on the NPCs, you lose the players. So even though I just said that those two characters, Echo and Misfortune, run um, have a big place in my games, they're never the main character. They don't ever take the main character seat. Even when I made one the main antagonist for a game, they didn't steal agency away from the players. And instead, I modified how they acted in, uh, to invoke better roleplay opportunities from my players as I was running the game. You need to think you're not telling a story, you're playing a game. And that's what you need to focus more on is the game aspects of the game. But not when I say that, I don't mean mechanics. I mean the group involvement and group enjoyment. That's what you want to emphasize as a storyteller.
Yeah, we're all here to have fun and enjoy ourselves. Yes, the story it is a we are telling a story. That's why World of Darkness calls it a storyteller, but it's a story about the players. That's why they want to be involved in the first place because it means they're doing something.
And when you're running your game, have it be, say, vampire or werewolf, the World of Darkness classic has a constant theme that it's a constant theme of bleakness. Everything can go wrong, everything can collapse tomorrow. Gehenna can happen tomorrow, the apocalypse can happen tomorrow, your rival mages can ascend before you tomorrow. And if you're playing Wraith, any day can be your last day for good, because the Oblivion is right around the corner. You are in a constant state of hopelessness. You are not the hero of a story. You don't have the power to change the world. The game isn't going to run long enough for that to happen typically, unless you're doing a special case where, say, you're playing as Vampire Methuselahs or mages that are at 7, for example. You typically aren't going to be the center of the universe, and the setting will put pressure on your characters and force them to adapt. You want to shoot for a gothic horror theme when you make your games. A lot of really good, the best thing you can look at for inspiration is World of Darkness itself in Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. That was the game that really got me into Vampire. I'm not the only person to say that because I know Outstar, the World of Darkness YouTuber, also talks about that Bloodlines was the way that she got into World of Darkness.
Yeah, I have the game. I
And
need to mod it and play it.
because you want to go full on, which one were you looking at? Were you looking at the Zamichi?
More than like, well, I wanted to do either Zamichi or honestly, I had an idea that I sent you a long time ago. I think I made him a Toreador.
Yeah, the Toreador is already in the base game.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
either
but
that
you
or
play as
Zamichi would be fun too.
you play as a pretty boy when you play as a Toreador in Bloodlines.
Obviously.
A natural redhead and everything.
Hmm.
So don't focus on the antagonist first, because this is World of Darkness isn't a man versus man or man versus nature, it's man versus world. The nature of the World of Darkness has made adversity, and your players need to figure out how to get through it. This isn't nihilism for the sake of nihilism. These games have never been about that. It's for me the mission statement of World of Darkness has always been bonding with people that you love, either strangers, family, or pre-existing friends, and learning how to survive the worst that the world has to throw at you together. And hopefully you got that, Kyle, when we were playing Vampire.
I definitely did because my character, Colt, in that game literally had everything he had ever wanted, and then it was taken from him, and he basically had to build back up from nothing again.
Mhm.
To which he did. He made friends with some of the people in the party. He reconnected with his wife, who did want to kill him because he was turned, and he was ready to accept that as an eventuality. But one of his friends that he'd made in the party came through and saved him at the last minute. So it is what
The best parts about that game were when we were in that bowling alley section, because we had our chronicle based in the southern parts of California and Las Vegas. And for the context of what he's talking about, we were in a bowling alley in Fresno. Our game took place during the COVID pandemic. So that bowling alley was completely empty and had been closed. And what happened is that our Bruja player, Ragnar, picked the lock of the bowling alley and just made it their haven for the night. they slept in the back parts of the bowling alley so sunlight wouldn't reach them because you know every bowling alley needs to have wide glass doors that the sun can just shoot right through.
Hmm.
Just that seems to be universal in every bowling alley I've ever been to.
Yeah.
But the best part about that game was it wasn't even a combat. We didn't do combat until right before we left the bowling alley. We just had a scene where all the players were at a bowling alley, and after Arzamichi, Vigo asked, "Does this place have power?" You guys figured out how to turn power back on to the bowling alley, and you guys played a game of bowling, and you guys had a moment where you just bonded as characters in the middle of that scenario. And that was at a pretty low point in our game too, because I think I put that in the game right before you encountered DJ Flash and the plot really reared its head. But that was, if I'm thinking right, that was right after the Ministry
That
Church
was right
in our
after
game.
we assaulted the Church of the Ministry and a blood hunt was placed on us. So we had to find a place to hide that wasn't like well, it was in California, but not in a place where any anarch could get to us. And
Yep.
we just
You
kind of like,
wanted to get as far away from San Francisco and Los Angeles as you could.
yeah. But Fresno was the closest place that we could find that had a place where we could hide. And so we hid there, and it wound up just being a nice moment where we all didn't have any combat to do. We didn't worry about the fact that the Anarchs had a blood hunt on us. We didn't worry about the fact that we still had a blood debt with the werewolves, and we just played some bowling. It was just a nice, sweet little moment where we all get to pretend to be human for a little bit again.
And in the moment where you encountered the wife as a boss fight, what really made that encounter special was when you were having your moment of despair about being in that situation, every party member stepped forward. Well, kind of sort of except Sylvester, but he did influence your
He
worlds.
actually did help.
Um, in order to prevent you from encountering your worst case scenario. And it was thanks to the players, the entire group collective, that that encounter went down its best possible route. You, as an individual, don't make big decisions. You, as a group, make the big decisions. And that is what pulled me over with World of Darkness because you're able to engineer moments like that in your game.
Yeah, it's the moments
And
that feel really believable. Like people would do this to
and
help each other.
and we probably have something like that coming in Werewolf because um, we haven't had a big moment yet because none of our players know each other yet. Because if you look at our live play, when we entered the Ministry, no, not the Ministry, but I say that the Black Furies cairn, a lot of the players are silent for the moment, and it's after we meet Jaden that we start talking as characters.
Yeah, that was a good moment there when we were trying to like actually determine who would be the pack alpha. I think that was a pretty great moment there.
And this brings me to a tip that I want to give you as a storyteller. This is kind of like a disconjointed video because it's me giving like offhand advice. It's whatever comes to my mind. I don't do scripts because I feel like I'm gonna make my content fake if I do that. What you want to do, I know we're not all Joe Rogan, I know we're not all Matthew Mercer, but you want to give your players a reason to talk with each other. Say, look at your players' backgrounds, and say, this is good. This resources background you have is good. Let's manipulate where you get your money from. And say that part of the reason why you get your money, for example, we have a Child of Guy character who has resources 3. One of their associates, as it turns out, is a Shadow Lord, and the Child of Guy knows this. And let's say one of your players is a Shadow Lord. So tip off to your Child of Gaia player that player over there is a Shadow Lord. Do they know your business contact? Do they know how to get more money than your resources allows you to? And start a conversation from there. Or ask your players what they think about the recent encounter they had, what they think about the next encounter they're going to get into. And also engineer situations where it would just be normal for them to talk to each other. I know we've all seen the D&D tavern um, way to start a campaign, but the reason that works is because it works. It gets some of your players to start talking with each other. Granted, some people will just refuse to do it, and the people I've seen refuse to do the tavern part are guys who just think the tavern is a cliche and then refuse to go along with it. But no, you want to engage with every part of the game that you're in.
Yeah.
And that brings me to my second point, player engagement. You always want to talk with your players and say, what do you think of these games? Like every time I do a game with you guys, I always say, how am I doing? How am I
Yes.
doing? What do you think this game is?
Feedback is all
And
important for a storyteller.
I am very thankful for Meepian because he tells it like it is when it comes to these games. He tells me I'm a little concerned that a lot of the enemies we're facing are rolling very high dice values, and I say don't worry too much about that. That was a boss fight you were encountering, and because we had boss fights against no, not boss fights, normal fights against gorehounds who are only rolling 5 or 6 dice for every attack. That Zamichi you were encountering that was rolling 12 dice, that was a Zamichi in Zula war form that I bid maxed. So don't worry about that. That's like a one and done thing. You want to ensure your players say, if they have a concern about something, that concern is either not that big of an issue and you say why it's not an issue, or you assure them that that was like a one-time thing that's not going to be the rest of the campaign.
Yeah.
As I remember with our vampire game that we talked about before, this episode, that Meepian came to me in a DM and said, I'm getting a little bit frustrated with being lied to constantly and I can't follow the story anymore. So I put an NPC in the game that was there to give you some exposition and set you back on the right track. And to give you a little bit of context, because I get with lies and deception, you're getting so much information from so many different characters, and you, the party, you were taking everything at face value for the majority of that vampire game.
Yeah, not a lot of people rolled wits and subterfuge, did we?
Not many of you just knew the questions to ask at the time either.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were
So
all pretty fresh to the world of darkness, so we weren't exactly sure. I feel like that sort of cleared up when we discovered who the Fomori were, or who the Fomori were that were posing as vampires. I feel like that was when we sort of resolved that issue. Was that episode?
yeah, the fake vampires when you start learning that everyone has a spy, that everyone is colluding with everyone. And you need to start paying attention as to who's lying to you. Because I remember specifically, there was an encounter that my players had against Hieronymo Baseggio, who was a La Sombra elder. This was a old school Italian monk. I say Italian Roman monk, who was leagues beyond them in terms of power. And whenever they had their encounter meeting him, I remember all of you took everything he said as truthful and didn't question it at all. And it was after the game I revealed to you that everything he said was a lie through his teeth, and you didn't know that that was the case.
Yeah. I mean,
Uh,
how what would we do if we questioned him? He would have killed us.
you can question him, and that's what the fun of World of Darkness is. Because you're in such a small place, you have to be very careful about the questions you ask people whenever it comes to this. And you also need to adjust your encounters accordingly. Say, I want my players to ask the difficult questions, but I don't want to freely give them information. You don't want to give your players a sense of security as you play your games. You want them to always feel a little bit on edge because, after all, Vampire the Masquerade describes itself as a political horror, or at least a political thriller. So you got the thrills out of that. But at the same time, feel like might have made a little bit of a mistake while running that encounter. It's because you guys didn't ask anything, and I think the only person who really questioned that encounter was Sylvester.
Well, I mean, Sylvester was a part of that church. He knew the questions to ask because he'd been
It's be
trusted by Baseggio in order to carry out his task.
and What I was waiting for him to ask was questions about guys like Rudy Holland, who we encountered very early in the game, and then that plot point dropped because he died. And I was waiting for that to happen, but that was also me as like a news storyteller saying I'm not exactly signposting what questions you should be asking. And that's something that I feel like I've learned from and improved as a storyteller, because now I know if there is an opportunity to learn more things, I'm going to raise that to you. Because when we had that Nosferatu encounter when I was at your house in the last episode we did the live play, I made sure to very quickly signal post to Ham's character Chico, you as a Bonar, you recognize that that is a Nosferatu. You know what Nosferatu do. Ask away.
Yeah, that's
Because if
good.
I
Sure, good.
if I said nothing, Grim would have killed the Nosferatu immediately, and then would have gotten no information from that
Exactly.
encounter.
That, and it's I feel like that's also good for our brain just from a world building perspective, the fact that now we because now we know that if we do encounter Nosferatu, get the Bonar to talk to them because they know the most about them.
Mhm. You want to say, I think there might be an official idea about this somewhere posted in GM's Guild or something like that. I always just refer to it as specialties, like character background specialties whenever I look at characters, where I say, "Oh, you're a Shadow Lord." You already know about Pentax companies, what those companies' names are, what their revenue is, what their Dow is, what their stock price is. You also know about Camarilla, and you know about all seven clans of the Camarilla. You're a child of Gaia. You know a lot about rock music. You know a lot of different rock trivia. You know about this kind of information. You can use this to talk to other people about music and then start getting information from NPCs using music as a starting point. You're a Bonar. You know every alley within this city. You know where the shelters are. You know where to find free food. You know where anybody who's generous, the best street corner to hang out on for generous people. You know this stuff because you're playing this character from this tribe. That's a good thing to always tell people. A Tremere should always know about the occult. A Nosferatu should always know about the internet. A Malkavian should always be getting visions and should already be well aware of what the voices are. Even if they're a neonate, the Malkavian, I feel like the Malkavian should already like innately know that the schizophrenic voices they're getting come from them.
Yeah.
And same thing with your character flaws too, because in that same vampire game, I repeatedly said to Ragnar, who is a Bruja, your encounter with this NPC is pissing you off. You start reaching for your gun, or you start balling your fist in the middle of this conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of
You
like,
would always emphasize that something was acting up from the vampire side of things.
and you could say that it's immersion breaking, that pulls you out of the moment. I disagree with that entirely, because I frequently see in a few D&D games where players stop playing their characters and start being themselves when it comes to asking questions. Because you need to know that even though you are the player character isn't you. And you need to show some restraint when it comes to asking questions or doing some actions. Because after all, you are the writer and actor at the same time for your character. But you have to do both simultaneously. You can't do these apart, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah. I know that because I mean, when I play my real life game, when I'm playing Storm King's Thunder with my friends, a lot of us are actually really good about trying to inhabit the character, and if for whatever reason somebody's personal feelings come up in the character, like the GM or as somebody else who's paying attention will talk to them about it, like, hey, is that, and even sometimes we'll think about that because we'll want to do something and go, I would want to do this, but I can't do that because that's not who I am right now.
Hmm.
So it's good
And
to
same
catch
thing when I
yourself
was
as a player as well.
That's good, and I tell you, I do that too in the Tuesday game that I'm a player in, because Yan the Githyanki deserter in D&D knows a lot about military and a lot about weapons and armor, but can't tell you anything about trees or flowers. So whenever it comes time to do a nature check, I always go in as if the character knows nothing about everything. Even if we're encountering a blue cat mushroom, which I have seen several times in different games and I use as an item as a GM, I can't say anything about that because my character wouldn't know anything about that.
Yeah, so it's always
But
important to catch yourself.
but don't go too far with it as a storyteller because it can get frustrating if you're just not allowed to know some stuff that seems basic. Because we you didn't stick around for the game. The Friday group that we mentioned before, it formed under a GM that wasn't me. So I followed that guy into a Monday game, and I got immensely frustrated in it because I was playing as a gnome and I just wasn't allowed to know basic gnome stuff, like who Jarl Glittergold is supposed to be the patron god of gnomes, and I'm not allowed to know what a kobold is. And the reason he's telling me this is because he says, you picked the hermit background, you're a recluse. That's not what the hermit background is. I'm a guy who's lived by himself for a long time, but the hermit starts off with intelligent boosting skills. And my character had high wisdom. I should at least know about the world around me. And when I go to make a check and you say, you just can't do it because I don't think your character would know that, that is incredibly frustrating, and no player is going to want to put up with that.
Yeah, see, like, what we do is that, like, if they're, like, for example, my sister's character, my Saturday game, Roken, is from the Underdark. And while he spent the majority of his life in the Underdark, the DM still lets the character roll for certain things like nature on the surface plane, because even if the DC is higher, there's still a chance that he just might know something about it. And that's the reason dice rolling is so important when it comes to checks, because even if you as a character might not know, there's ever so slight of a chance that they might know, which is why the probability is so important in the game.
Hence why the skill checks exist. I'm trying to get away from the mindset of having a skill check be everything in D&D because we have a character that's in my D&D Wednesday game who was a former member of the Zentarum, and the Zentarum are involved in a lot of criminal organizations in the game. So you want to have that character already know a lot of criminal underground networks, criminal organizations, most names on the most wanted list, and having some intuition in being a criminal already.
Yeah, because
And
actually, one of the first factions we met in Storm King's Thunder was the Zentrum. So
which if you know that as a player, you already know that encounter is going to go sour. But that also brings up another point. How much lore do you need to know about World of Darkness? And I might have spoiled some parts about Vampire the Masquerade to you already because there are two very different ways you could play Vampire the Masquerade. Bloodlines, I mean.
yeah,
You can go into that game knowing everything about Vampire, or you can go into it knowing nothing. And the two are very different because as a Vampire fan, you go into this and you start looking at this stuff and say, "Oh, that makes sense. Oh, that makes sense. Oh, that makes sense." But when I checked out Vampire for the first time, I had no idea what any of this does. I was looking at the clans. I had no idea what either of the seven Camarilla clans were supposed to be and what their powers were. So the guy I was watching when he picked Malkavian, I had no idea what that was supposed to be. And then when he goes out and uses dementation for the first time, I had no idea that a vampire could do that. I thought it was just going to be superhuman strength and speed and the power to drain blood. But no, they have mind tricks too. Okay. And then I learned about ghouling. I learned about what the Camarilla structure was. I learned about Clan Ventru, and then Clan Ventru quickly wormed its way into my heart after I found out what they were like. And if you go into a game with a player that knows nothing about World of Darkness, don't feel pressure when I say this. This is your opportunity to blow them off their feet about the world, because they know nothing about this setting, and you get to have a lot of fun showing them what this stuff is. Granted, there is no World of Darkness definitive, because, well, frankly, there's a lot of books and a lot of different ways to interpret information given the unreliable narrator nature of the games and all the lore continuity and errors and plot holes, making the lore kind of janky. It's always going to be your version of World of Darkness, not the definitive version of World of Darkness. So don't tell your player character whenever they're encountering something new, this is your way of running it, not the definitive way. Because after all, the source books do exist, and I always recommend check out the source books. I really like a lot of the source books.
yeah. I mean, I think
'Cause
that. Go ahead.
whenever we do an episode, I could just mansplain to you everything about a werewolf tribe, but no, I send you the text because I like the text that much.
Well, yeah, and then I wanna dive into it to make sure that I help make a great episode.
And that said, when you if you're running we'll say vampire for example, do you need to know everything about vampire? No. What would be nice is to know what the seven basic clans are: the Brujah, Gangrel, Malkavians, Nosferatu, Toreador, Tremere, and Ventrue. But you don't need to know everything about them. You don't need to know how the clans typically feel about each other. You don't even need to know about the antediluvians, Methuselah's elders, or high-ranking members. You don't need to know anything about the lore characters. You can just run a vampire game as is, because vampire is very easy to run in an isolated bubble. Do you need to know this stuff for werewolf, though? You want to have an idea as to what the worm is supposed to be. The Weaver and the Wild, it would be nice to know it, but you might not need to bring them up as much until one of your players takes something like Wild Resurgence as a gift. Then you might need to know something about the Wild. You also want to know what some of what these tribes are, considering how wild some of their political ideologies get. You can be whatever you want as a vampire. You can have a Ventrue who's just a surfer on Venice Beach, and he doesn't want to be a CEO or a prince. He just wants to be the best surfer. And that's easy enough. You're a Ventrue. All you need to know about playing a Ventrue is you want to be the best at something. With Werewolf, you need to know what that tribe is. You need to, but specifically the political ideology of that tribe, but it's not simple as that, is it?
No, it really
Because
isn't.
if I were to tell you that the Shadow Lords, which we just did an episode about, were about fascism, first and foremost, what would you immediately get from that?
I would go, I don't want to play them because I'm not a fascist.
Then I explain to you the history of the Shadow Lords, how they've been burned throughout history, what Grandfather Thunder means to them, their accomplishments, and their current stance where they partially control Russia. Now, do you want to play Shadow Lord?
Yes, because that sounds like it'd make an interesting story.
Knowing about the lore with some of these games is going to make do wonders for you, because you don't need to know that much about vampire. You do need to know about werewolf. I can't say that about mage though. You can safely know about one tradition and only one tradition in mage, and you can just run mage as simple as that, because mage is a very easy concept. It's about reaching ascension, and each of the traditions and each of the technocracy conventions has a different definition as to what that's supposed to mean. So until you read Ascension, where you don't have to, you can just run Mage, you don't need to know about any of the other Mage traditions if you don't want to use them. Kyle, we can have an entire game that's just the virtual adepts. And we can just run a game as the virtual adepts and just do the virtual adepts in isolation. We don't need to bring up another mage at all. We don't even need to bring up the technocracy, because the concept of the virtual adepts is just cool enough. And hopefully, with learning about the virtual adepts, mages that go inside of computers into cyberspace, you should already get ideas about what to do with mage.
Yeah, you immediately start playing the Matrix theme. That's what you do as a virtual adept. You wear a trench coat, sunglasses, and then you jump into your phone.
And Wraith the Oblivion, you don't need to know anything about the lore for that game, because that is a personal horror game. That is man versus self when you are playing Wraith. And that is because of that shadow self mechanic where you play each other's shadow selves, your dark sides, and you get to torment each other as your shadow selves. And that alone can carry the game. Just the concept of being a guy who's dead and is a ghost is already a good start for a game, but the shadow selves, the amount of drama involved in that, you don't need to know anything about the guilds. You don't need to know anything about the legions. You don't even need to know about Karen and Stygia or any of the other Shadowlands. You can just run Wraith with that and that alone.
Yeah.
And kind of sort of the same with Changeling. I'd say knowing the lore about Changeling does enhance the game, but you don't need to know that much about Changeling. Because Changeling, you just need to know you're a half fairy. There are some rules to being a fairy. You need to know the rules. It's nice to know what the Kith are, because that's kind of sort of like playing a class in changeling, but you don't need to know that much about the Kith. You can really go changeling. You can play a whole changing game without knowing any of the lore or history because you frankly don't need it because changing is about the here and now whenever you play that game.
Yeah.
And it's very simple in concept. You're either playing a magical girl game or you're playing Fairly Odd Parents, and that's typically what that game is.
Depending on if you're Sealy or
And
unsealy court. Otherwise, it could turn into what's that Stephen King book about the car?
here, I know what you're talking about. Oh no, it's on tip of my tongue.
Yeah, I can't remember it either. But
Christine.
Christine, yes, you become
Yes.
Christine.
Yeah. And Hunter the Reckoning. You don't need to know that much to run Hunter the Reckoning. You can run you can run a hunter guild just straight. You can say you don't need to know about the IAA, Church of St. Leopold, or Arcanum. You could just say you're a bunch of guys who go to church together and you want to hunt vampires, and boom, it's simple as that. There's your Hunter the Reckoning game. Granted, you do want to know about other bits of lore because Hunter the Reckoning is specifically supposed to be an in-game scenario. Hunter the Reckoning is one of the endings, quote unquote, of World of Darkness. It's the humans rising up, realizing they're being controlled, and taking their lives back. That's what Hunter the Reckoning is.
That is the veil has been that is the veil has been breached, the masquerade has been breached, and there's no coming back from it.
And that the PS2 games, for example, I think those games give you the impression that you're incredibly badass as a hunter. You aren't. Just one hit from anything kills you in that game. But that's the kind of mentality you want to go in with, that you are the human, you're the dangerous creature in the room. You want to go in and cleanse whatever you're hunting.
Yeah, as I've said multiple times in the past, playing Hunter the Reckoning is like making the choice to play as the Space Marines in Alien versus Predator.
You are the group that has the most members, but you will always be underpowered given what you're going up against because every encounter in Hunter is a boss fight.
Yeah, you got to work really hard together with your team in order to bring down a vampire or a werewolf.
And going along with that, do you need to know about the meta plot? No, and I typically ignore the meta plot entirely when I run my games. It's in canon that Malkav is dead in our Emerald Darkness. That Malkav died. We don't have a definitive answer as to what killed him. It's just that he's not around anymore. He's just in the Madness Network. And I disregarded that when I ran our own vampire game because, as you found out from that game, Malkav was the final encounter.
Yep. Well, yes. So, none of us were prepared for that. And we realized we were played the whole time and there was nothing we could do to stop him.
And well, no, there was. You just didn't know the answer.
Yeah, I was racking my brain, and Ragnar was trying to get a vision, but none of us could come up with anything.
That's what the issue. You guys were relying on rolls.
Yeah.
So you can look at any of the antediluvians, and you can say, "I want this antediluvian to be alive," where although Sombra is supposed to be in the Mariana Trench trying to roast alive and it's never going to work, we're going to reach into the ocean, pull out La Sombra, and put him in the game, and there he is. The Chronicle now involves La Sombra. You don't want to get too carried away when bringing in names because it begins to look like Archive of Our Own fan fiction if you start doing that. Um, you can do that if your group is okay with that, but know that some strangers on the internet might not be okay with it because the meta plot is sacred to some people for some reason. Typically, I'm not a fan with it because I really don't like the way that Wraith the Oblivion ends, but that's just me.
It all depends
And
on you as a storyteller.
and for example, you can modify some parts about Werewolf. You don't like that all the Croton are dead? Well, just write that part out. Say the whole issue with the Eater of Souls never happened. There's the Croton. You can now interact with the Croton. But you would want to think about how is that going to affect the world at large if you change parts about the meta plot. It's not the most important thing in the world, but most of these source books are written to follow a meta plot that moved throughout each source book and each edition, where what I really, really like about these games is that what happened in first edition still happened, but it's put in a different context, and then it goes on to influence what's going on in second edition. Um, I like that a lot, and you see some of that stuff happen with D&D, but most of the lore events in D&D tend to be so inconsequential that they don't really affect the world at large the same way it does in World of Darkness. You can go your entire D&D life and never hear Netherese once in your life because that's how little influence that group has in the world of ABL Toril in the modern day. But in World of Darkness, if it happened and it was in the meta, it was in a source book, it is part of the meta plot, and it has greatly affected the world. Like I said before, you don't need to know that much about lore, but unless it's Werewolf, you do want to have a loose understanding about some of the stuff that happens in each of these games. Werewolf, that's why we're making the podcast in particular, is because Werewolf is the most difficult game to play, and that's why we've been doing our episodes
Yeah,
on
we
Werewolf first.
because I was I was really fresh going into Vampire. I had no idea about most of it until like really late in the game when we were almost done. And now that we're doing this podcast and we're playing Werewolf, I can take what I learn from the podcast and from our reading, and then I can incorporate it into how much does my character actually know, or how much should he know when we go in to play the game.
In Vampire, you were playing a city gangrel, a city version of a gangrel, and you clicked with that very quickly.
Well, I mean, I was playing a fish out of water protagonist on purpose, mostly because I didn't know, and I felt like this would be the best way for me to learn the story. And with the
And you were doing it right because you spent a lot of time trying to interact with animals, which is what a gangrel would do.
I had a pet dog. His name was Lou, and he was a good boy.
And and even when we met Debbie's birds, the birds that were under effects of animalism by another vampire that you didn't know, you still tried interacting with those birds.
I mean, it's an ability I had. I figured I may as well use it.
Because I remember that encounter too, because we were outside of a gas station, you just look up and you just happen to notice that that vulture is looking at you like it's smart, and you tried interacting with it. That was good.
Yep.
Now imagine how tough it would be if we started with Werewolf, and you wanted to play as the Fianna, and then I dumped all the information on you about the Fianna.
And then I would have been like, wait, what? I was supposed to do what now?
There's no caitiff option that you can play as in Werewolf. There's the Ronin, but they don't even get a stab block. And hell, with the way that gifts and Gnosis and everything works, I don't think you could progress beyond like rank 1 abilities playing as a Ronin. And if there is an answer to that, I don't know it. Like I said, I haven't been playing Werewolf for years and years and years. If there is an answer, do leave it in the comments. But that's going to be a hell of a ride if you play without a tribe in Werewolf.
Oh yeah.
And that's going to be something that's going to lose a player very quickly because if the game is too difficult, they'll lose interest.
Yeah, which is where the concern about difficulty came up earlier in the podcast, which is why you need to be very clear about when something is a boss fight and when it's not going to happen again. Or if it does, it happens down the road when we've learned how to fight better than we did before.
Yeah, because when you encountered Killer Queen in Werewolf, you saw by the way he was designed that that was a very specific enemy that you were going to encounter the one time.
Yes, and I don't. And now that Grim ripped his head off, we will not be seeing him again. Thank God.
Oh, when you kill a vampire, he stays dead. And is there anything else off the top of my head that I should think of? Should you do crossovers? Yes, it's the world of darkness. And if you want to say that you should keep spots separate, you can. I strongly recommend doing that if you are a new time storyteller or if you just want a game to be about vampires and only vampires. That's cool. But even in a game that's specifically about one splat, I'm bringing up Bloodlines again. Surprise, it mixes splats. Hunters from Hunter the Reckoning are a common enemy you fight in Hollywood. You fight a werewolf and a Rokia as boss fights in that game. there you meet a mage technocrat hunter for one of the side quest. And there's an entire level that you need to do regardless of route, where you encounter a wraith that you can't damage and it chases you through a mansion. That game mixes splats, you just didn't notice it because it did it so naturally. Or it was side content that you had to go and find. The only splat I think that doesn't come up once is Changeling.
Yeah.
And that's because it's a little difficult to mix vampire and changeling, but we're doing an episode about changeling next week, so check that one out in case I have any thoughts on that.
By then, you should have no
And
shortage of ideas.
and you prepared a list of questions that you want to ask me, and then I'm going to give a little bit more advice as to how you, the storyteller, should interact with your players more. Actually, I have an idea right now. I have an idea right now.
Yeah. You've
So,
answered
so
a good number of them so far, so.
we live in a world where a lot of people are a little bit more sensitive, and this is a game that is explicitly political. Get a read of the room before you run World of Darkness.
Yes.
If you are running a game that is very liberal or left-leaning, you might not want to make your game about neo-Nazis, considering that that might genuinely upset a lot of your players. And if you're playing a game that's very conservative or right-leaning, you might not want to have a character who is a pedophile portrayed in a good light, because that's going to greatly upset somebody.
You don't want the ministry in there.
No, no, you don't, because that might get somebody like genuinely pissed. And even if they're not offended, it's going to rile them up and get them genuinely upset. And if your player is in a heightened state, that could mess up some of the gameplay, namely the teamwork aspect, because that player might fly off the cuff and do something by themselves or say something regrettable. So get a read of what the room is and where your players stand politically. I remember those World Darkness game I saw posted on Roll20 that said no political extremists, but it made it very clear that they meant political extremists from one end of the spectrum. As a storyteller, don't do that. Um, don't try catering to a specific base whenever you play World of Darkness. Don't create an echo chamber for yourself. You don't improve from that. I learned a few things about myself by running Vampire. I learned a few things about myself running D&D. If you're just making propaganda for yourself, you're frankly wasting your time and you really should be doing something else.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it overall, even if it is a political game set in a very perverted and dark and grim dark version of the world we live in today, it is still just a game. You can have some politics in your game. That's fine. But if you try to make it propaganda, then it's just not going to be fun for anybody. And it's going to get really
Yeah,
annoying really quick.
yeah. If you sit your players down and start talking about how Pantex is causing climate change, and you start going off in like a big spiel about climate change and global warming, and start talking about how good, oh, why is it? I think it's called UTC, like Universal Income, what?
UBI, Universal
UBI, Universal
Basic
Basic Income,
Income.
and start giving lectures. Or on the other side, you start talking about how World of Darkness was predicting the future and how there's real life vampires infiltrating the White House, and that we need to go and be hunters and start eradicating them and do January 6th for real. Get out of that group if your storyteller is doing that.
Yeah, you don't need. Look,
Uh,
the majority of the politics that should happen in your game shouldn't be regular human politics. It should be about the politics within the vampires. It should be about the politics within the Garrow. And something you need to like in our werewolf game. Reynard has made it. Well, Sean as a character has made it explicit that Reynard helped vouch for Grim to become pack leader because Reynard can get in his ear, and Tyler's trying to piece that together with his roles in the game. So that is Garrow politics, but that is far from real world politics.
And you can make a game that takes place with real world politics. Like I said, our vampire game took place during the pandemic. And in our werewolf game, Kamala Harris is president. But we don't make that the focus of the game. That's just part of the world. I didn't make my vampire game specifically about ending the COVID-19 pandemic. You can make games about real world politics, And I'm going to say it's fair game if you want to do anything from, say, 2012 and older. But the more modern you get with your issue, you might really want to read the room and read the sensitivities and watch what you say so you don't turn your game into propaganda.
Yeah. Remember, it's a game. We're here to have fun. Okay, so
Because
what's up?
it was like what we said about Shadow Lords, like at the end, we said, like in 1994, it was highly likely that the Shadow Lords had a connection to Vladimir Putin. We did not go into detail about the war in Ukraine after we said that.
We said a couple of things, but we didn't like dive in. It's not like the
And
Galliard are
even then,
trying to take Ukraine as a part of Russia or anything.
yeah, and even then we were doing like a little like tee hee honey ha ha funny eyebrow raise at that. And
Yeah.
we weren't going to go anywhere further than that. We didn't say anything incriminating.
No.
And one more thing I want to say about that. I fundamentally disagree with the idea of trigger warnings. I feel like that plays into a little bit of narcissism. And it's like the same as like spoiling a child. If you keep saying, okay, we're not going to put corn on your plate, you're never going to eat corn. You eventually need to face your own fears and the stuff that makes you feel uncomfortable because you're going to stop feeling uncomfortable around them eventually. I, for example, have a horrible fear of carnivorous plants where I feel like electric pain shoot through my hands whenever I see one. But I'm trying to get over that the best I can. I'm doing like piece by piece, trying to like expose myself to it and get over it. I can look at a corpse flower, I can look at a pitcher plant just fine, but stuff like the Venus flytrap and especially stuff like Little Shop of Horrors freaks me the fuck out.
Yeah.
I'm not ready for that shit yet, but I'm trying to get over it.
I didn't notice
But
that till a long time ago when I shared it, and he was like, "Get that shit the fuck off the screen right now." And I was like, "Whoa,
yeah,
what did I do?"
yeah, I had my throat closed when you sent that.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I
I
like the
think we were in somebody
song.
else's. It was more that we were in somebody else's game, and that popped up as a GIF in the chat, and I freaked out after that.
Oh yeah.
But but you want to ask your players before you start the Chronicle, what are you okay and not okay with being in this game? You want to have a conversation with them, and don't let it get to the point where the player is trying to censor you and tailor the story to what they want. Uh, if it's stuff like a genuine phobia, good, but if they start getting like very long-winded with the stuff that upsets them and you start noticing there might be an ulterior motive, you might need to cut that player loose.
Yeah,
Um,
it's like be courteous to them, but don't pander to them.
yeah, you as a storyteller, you technically are serving your players a story, but the players don't control you. You have a communal relationship, not a master-servant relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
And something that I remember hearing, I tried pulling this sound clip up for you before we started the episode, and it was Rage Across the Internet that was talking about running games with storytellers. I think it was in their Problem Players 2 episode now that I think about it.
Yeah, I was
I
listening
don't
to
re-
the one you recommended, and I was like, this isn't really going anywhere.
it's not because so much of their episodes is just them talking, and I hope we haven't been doing it for this one because I really want to improve based off of what I saw. But
Well, this is kind of a
there
chill
was something.
episode since we hit a pretty long-winded Shadow Lords episode because you had a lot to say about that, and there was a lot to go over.
And when we do this, the live plays that we do, nobody's watching them, so I'm not too worried about it. But we do a
Yet.
little bit of conversating. We talk before we start the game just to shoot the shit and like because we're friends, we want to talk about stuff, and we do that sometimes in the middle of a game. And that's because I'm not trying to be Shakespeare. I'm not trying to be Mark Twain. I'm running a game on Roll20 for friends. I'm not trying to impress anybody. I have nothing to prove. I'm just being myself. I'm not trying to be the next great American novelist because I know I never will be.
Yeah, I mean,
And
for when I'm in
granted,
my what's up?
I was going to say, yeah, you want to get the show on the road with your game at some point, but don't be afraid to like talk a little bit. But that's just the issue I have with Rage Across the Internet is that they do that too much, and it's about stuff that nobody cares about.
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's like it was honestly those conversations that sort of inspired us to eventually start a podcast because we liked the chemistry that we all had. And yeah, we do stop to talk every now and again in the game, but that helps it feel more human, really. Because in my real life games, when I'm playing Storm King's Thunder, It's like John was hearing my sister and her girlfriend, who's the GM, talk about it. It's like we take some time to like hang out. We have campfire chats late in the game when there's not really that much to be done. We have tavern talks when there isn't really anything going on, where we make jokes in character, and it really helps us bond as players and our characters bond as characters. So absolutely encourage dialogue. Just create like a little friend circle for your group.
Yeah, make sure you're not boring anybody either. But I remember, I don't remember which one it is, and I don't want to give that guy any views or any search engine optimization. But he said something in. But the guy I'm talking about is Porter. I'm gonna say his name because I'm not a pussy. I He said something to me that I thought was genuinely offensive and really insensitive to say, and he was giving an anecdote about him wanting to run a game where the Ananasi were the main villain, and he might have been speaking like anecdotally. It may or may not have happened, but given the example that your players are going into a lair and they start seeing cobwebs, and then one of your players raises a hand and says, "I'm not okay with spiders," and then Porter treated it like you just spat in his face, that he had been working for months creating a spider encounter, and now he can't do it because somebody doesn't like spiders. And then he tried saying that the spiders weren't real, it was just a digital image of a spider, and that you need to get over it because it's not like I'm putting an actual spider on the table. And I got genuinely offended when I heard that. Because, dude, did you not, like, would you not have thought at any point in the game saying, is anyone here arachnophobic before you fucking ask that? And even if it's spiders, you can say, no, it's not actually spiders. Instead, you can say this is a Zumichi that's stretched out skin and has taped it to the walls. You want to be like flexible with your storytelling too, saying if a player isn't okay with something, have something you can change to keep the encounter going, and so you don't need to rewrite everything. Because once again, your players don't know the plot. You know the plot, but you can change the plot whenever you're ready. Like I said with that anecdote beforehand about the Great Dragon Migration in D&D, the villain was going to be a gold dragon until I decided it was going to be Bahamut. And I did that before I ever thought of a villain reveal for that game. But dude, like get over it, Snowflake, when it comes to a player having a genuine concern, and then later in the episode saying, well, why would you put anything like real life sexual violence or rape in your game? And why would you ever put your player in a situation like that? You would put your player in a situation like that because you clearly didn't give a shit about what they thought was okay and not okay before you made the game. If you're coming at it from that perspective.
Yeah, and
You need to ask your players what they can and can't put up with, what's going to genuinely upset them. And even though it's a digital image, it's not real, it's still making them think of that image. It's still putting them in an uncomfortable situation. I feel like I shouldn't have to say this, but I do because I genuinely think he doesn't understand that.
Yeah,
And
it's because
but
the world of darkness, it's full of things that people are going to find uncomfortable, and like we said before, just it's good to be courteous to your players before you develop something that can make them feel genuinely uncomfortable. Like, yes, sexual violence is going to happen in the world of darkness, but you need to check with your players first if they're okay seeing something like that. I mean, it shouldn't be worried about like every little thing, but definitely check like, hey, is there anything you guys are 100% not okay with being in this game before I start writing it? And like, I mean, even if you've worked for months on a story, if it's something inconsequential, like there being spiders somewhere, you can probably change that. It's not a huge deal. It's just spiders.
hell, they even think about that. You can have it be the Slua instead, and you're entering a Slua realm, changing to dreaming.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, but dude, like even when we were doing the live play, I don't want to put myself on a pedestal because I'm literally who. When we went into episode 3 of the live play, I said before we started that episode, this episode is going to have some sexual content in it. And I waited a little bit for anyone to respond saying if they weren't okay with that, and then I went on with the game seeing that you were fine. I warned you guys before I do something in an episode, whether or not it would have something that would upset you, because your answer can change. What's okay for you today might not be okay with you later. You remember in 2017 when my cousin Brett broke his neck and I couldn't play GTA for a while because I couldn't think of a car accident.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why you want to constantly be in communication with your players You, the storyteller, aren't the most important thing in the game. Your relationship with the players and the whole table are equally important. That's what you want to do. And that's enough for me. Free speaking, you have a few questions prepared for me, right?
Yeah, I got a couple of them. You went through a lot of them already because I sent them
Hmm.
because I sent them beforehand. But a couple of questions mechanically, just for any
Yeah.
new storytellers out there. So first of which is player agency. How in your I know you like to plan sessions like as you go, sort of, in order to be more lenient. However, what is just the right amount of structure or freedom in your opinion for World of Darkness Splat?
I've been bored out of my mind in sandbox games. I can't stand those, and players will like to say, I like sandbox games. You don't because you haven't been in a sandbox game. You haven't seen what it's like. And what I mean by that, I mean the GM or storyteller drops you into a setting and then just says, what do you do? And then just puts his hands on the table, mutes his microphone, and does nothing and waits for a player to say something. I was in a D&D game where that call was dead silent for 3 minutes before I finally said something.
Yeah, because they had
And
no idea what to do.
yeah, you need to have stuff available in your game. You want to signpost stuff. You want to say, oh, you're in this city street. Check these few places out. There's a diner over there. It looks like they have a sale going on. Give a little signpost as to how much money your characters have in their pockets and whether or not they're hungry. Say, oh, you look over at the sewer. The sewer has a weird smell to it. Do you want to investigate it? You look over at the roof. Oh, there's a bird, and it looks like it's looking at you. What do you do about that? You want to put little things like that that could snowball into big adventures going down the line, and you want your players to choose the order of events that in which these happen. For
Y-
example, in our live play,
Yeah.
I gave you the option after you met the Nosferatu in the sewer whether or not you wanted to continue pursuing the Setite that you met earlier in the session, or if you wanted to turn around, talk to Wrath of the Storm, and ask him, why are you talking with the Ventru? I gave you the option to do that, and you as a group chose to pursue the Setite.
Well, we had a feeling that, like, given he was in New York, and given there aren't a whole lot of places for a werewolf to recover, then eventually we'd see him again. That was just the assumption. Whether we do or not
Mhm.
is entirely up to you.
Mhm.
But we went with the brute with the Setite is escaping. We have his trail. We need to get after him now because that was the task we were given. So, well, not necessarily,
And
but that's what we found the most pressing matter at the time.
and same thing with the D&D anecdote, with you playing Storm King's Thunder. When you got to choose between Bryn Shandor, Golden Hills, and Tribor, what did you go for?
We went to Golden Fields because that was Colt's home, and we figured there we can rest, recover, get our thoughts together, and think, okay, what's going on? We could take a rest. We'll ask around town, see if anybody else has seen anything. It was
And that's the best decision that you could have had because that was a setting that you were given the choice to visit, and your character already had a personal stake in there that wasn't related to the story that was pre-written.
Yes. So we actually kind of sort of talked about this a little bit when you came over to visit. We were talking about Bethesda versus Obsidian game design, the difference between Fallout 3 and Fallout New Vegas, where,
Mhm.
you walk outside of the vault and you see like one or two things, and the rest of the game is basically empty. And however, like Fallout New Vegas, you go out, you're immediately in Good Springs, and you can see Vegas on the horizon. You can you can talk to the people in town and know to go south. You can see the road that leads south. You can see the prison off in the distance. The whole idea of you can't miss it game design especially rings true in tabletop RPGs. Because if you don't have a cardinal direction of where to go or somebody to talk to, then you're going to be basically lost. And then your party's going to sit there with their thumb at their ass going, okay, we're here. What do we do?
They're also going to miss so many good moments because I tell you, one of the biggest tragedies to Fallout 3's game design was that so many players missed the Agatha's Song quest. That is a game that you will play and know that half the content was just completely hidden away because you had no idea where to look for it from. And the thing is, with Fallout 3's quest, this one I'm talking about, Agatha's quest, it's the one where you have to find a violin. And it's in Vault 92, which is already a bad spot to put a quest this important, which it's a place that's buried on the map that has no distinct marker because of how vaults work. And you have no way to naturally come across this place as you're traveling. So this is one of the best quests in the game, and you have no signs pointing you in that direction. Meanwhile, with Fallout New Vegas, you encounter Vault 3 just by playing the game's story as normal, because a place that you can go to avoid some enemies is next to a farm, and you can go there, get a little bit of food, which you will need if you're playing the really hard difficulties. But while you're there exploring, you just see a vault door on the horizon, and you go check it out, and boom, that's the entire quest line that's just sitting there. Same with Vault 22, if you're doing anything that involves you going to Jacobstown, you see Vault 22 on the horizon and you want to check it out because it's green in an area that's been nothing but orange up until this point. And
Yeah,
that's what's so good. You want to have little goodies off in the horizon for your players to investigate because they think it's interesting and want to go to it.
yeah, it's like in our werewolf game, we all know, okay, the main goal of this game, fuck up Pentix, fuck up the worm by any means necessary. But there's a lot of downtime between the worms we're fighting and all the other things that we need to do. It's like, okay, we're a newly formed pack. Well, I guess we need a patron now. We go into the Umbra to do this right, and we receive a vision from Honey Badger. And Honey Badger says, hey, there are two places you can go to find another pack member. Go to one, and then it opens another one. It's just like New Vegas. You can't miss it game design. There's some real...
Even if you botch
What's up?
Even if you botch that side quest, there's still an avenue for you to progress. Because even if you mess up the quest, there is still a way for the game to continue. Because Jaden Ling, the Korax, is your NPC party member, his personal totem, Crow, can become the pack totem if you mess up, according to both Honey Badger and Bacchus in that game.
Yeah. So we still have options even if we fail, which is great on great design on your part, because like there, given how we've been rolling, there is a chance that we would absolutely fuck it up. Knock on wood.
Because there's a chance that Ragnar Ling can escape, and you don't know where he goes next, and then you run out of time for that day.
He goes to Canada, smoke a cigar with his friend, and talk about how shitty New York is.
And of course, the discussion of railroading. If your players want a point A to point B story, run that, but let them feel like their decisions at least matter in the long run. Talk to anybody who has played Descent into Avernus and has run it straight out of the module in D&D 5e, and then ask them how long did you play that until you quit.
Yeah, for us, we completed Descent to Avernus front to back, but that's because the first half of the game had some railroading. But then once we got out of where were we at? We weren't in Baldur.
It's because when we got to Avernus, I took the rest of that module, I wrapped it up, and I threw it away, and I said, just go to any of these points that you want on the map.
Yeah, we literally got a vehicle to go from place to place, and we had a map full of shiny, cool towers to go visit. And we did go visit a whole bunch of them. And it made for a really interesting gameplay because we had no idea what we'd run into next.
But I didn't give you any NPCs that told you, go to this area because the next person you need to talk to is there. I didn't do that. You just went to these places because you thought they were interesting. You drove up to the Demon Zapper because you saw a tower that looked like the Eye of Sauron and you wanted to see what that was about.
Yeah, and we found that. We found there was a unicorn on the top that was sick of being stuck there. So we said, okay, we'll find somebody else who can take your job and you can go. And that became an own side quest in of itself. At the same time, we were being...
The most important part was I did not tell you where that replacement was. You had to find out on your own.
Yeah. And then we also had the 3 demon champions that were hunting us down the whole time we were down there. And that made for like an interesting random encounter where we could happen across a boss.
And it turns out there were only two the entire time because one of them was dead the entire time. You just didn't know it because you had no means of getting that information.
Yes, and then we managed, and we spared one of them, and he actually helped us out at the end of the game.
Not be said that Baphomet has no honor.
That's true, and and we found out.
And that was the start of him becoming one of my favorite NPCs in D&D.
A Baphomet?
Yeah,
Didn't we?
and
Didn't we talk to him again in Out of the Abyss?
yeah, you met him again in Out of the Abyss, and you played as Colt in that game, and he recognized who your son was, and that led to a little dialogue tree encounter with him that eventually led to you and the party forming a pact with him.
Well, a ceasefire agreement because we realized that all of the Devil Lords were being played by Lolth, so she could go to Avernus and take over for herself.
Did you make a quid pro quo agreement that involved signing a contract?
We didn't actually. We said,
Yes, you
"Hey,
did.
well, I did," and then I had Lathander absolve me of it.
And then you had Hamiltones sign the contract, and that's a pact.
Yeah, he did, but Ham signed it, not me.
You were part of that group, so you were involved in the contract, and then you got absolved because we had a god.
Let's hear from Planar Ally. Okay, so yeah. So a little bit of structure is necessary in order to make sure that your players know that there are things to do, but the way they tackle those objectives has to be up to them.
Exactly. You don't want a game where you feel like none of your decisions matter because another D&D horror story. I was involved in a game where stuff just happened, and it felt like I had no control over it. It was a Spelljammer game where the character I was playing as was a Forge cleric, and the story was made to be about one of the dungeon master's friends. Don't ever do that in the game. Don't never pick a favorite character. And it felt like that game was so tailor-made for it that every time I tried interacting or a plot point that was meant for me to engage with happened, it would just be a joke that would resolve and it wouldn't be funny because the GM just wasn't that funny of a comedian. And I left that game and I don't even think I told them goodbye. I just dipped one day because I said you're
You
not
gave
even
him
gonna
the
notice if I
Irish
left.
goodbye.
Yeah. And none of them messaged me after that either. So that shows how little I actually meant to that group.
Yeah,
But
I get that.
yeah. I granted don't do what I did, but I was pissed at the time. I thought it was okay.
Yeah,
Um,
at least tell
and
somebody.
and the big issue I have, once again, I don't want to make this a video just me shit talking rich across the internet, but I I'm gonna say it because I feel like Porter needs to hear this. And as sanctimonious as he got during my experience in his server about running games, somebody needs to tell you this. Your games are railroaded as hell, and they are so damn boring. There is a reason that nobody in your server listens to your live play. I remember he asked one time how many people have listened to a library, and nobody said they watched an episode. I went on one of their videos last week, and I saw it had no views. And there was a reason why. It was up for 2 days and it had no views. And the reason why is because the story he's running in Werewolf is so heavily railroaded. I'm thinking back to his third episode, where one reporter takes a picture of their werewolves and then runs off, and that's a massive breach of the veil. You want to get that camera at all cost. But instead what he does is that a Bonar pack jumps out of the woods and tells them, no, you don't want to pursue them, refuses to elaborate, and if I'm remembering right, I could be wrong about this part, but I don't think anybody got to roll a check before they just got ushered out of the scene. Was there no option to argue with these guys and say, can I pursue this lady? Or say, fuck it, you're not telling me what to do, I'm on a rune, I'm gonna cave your face in for preventing me from preventing a veil breach. It's that you're talking with Danny, Tommy, Melissa, and I forgot who your fourth person is. And it feels like they're just there as your actors, as your puppets, where it feels like it's you strutting your stuff, and it doesn't feel like it's a game. It just feels like it's your script and your radio play. And that's why I don't think anyone in your server is having a good time with the games.
Yeah. So,
And I'm telling you this because you think you're the you think you're hot shit when it comes to running games, and somebody needs to tell you to your face that you're not. I would have done it, but I'm not going to insult a man in his own home.
yeah, yeah.
All right.
Overall,
You have
just
another question for me?
yeah, this one, especially since we were talking about it earlier. How is it that you determine how difficult you want your fights to be when you're doing it, keeping with the theme mechanics of the game? Like, how is it that you
I'm con
determine that?
I was constantly adjusting encounters because for vampire specifically, I started seeing how well Sylvester and Vigo were doing in combat.
Hmm.
And that's when I started modifying the game because you encountered the Youngbloods and half that coterie was packing celerity. And then after you did super well in that fight, we started fighting vampires, and all of them had celerity, and I started giving them like discipline rank 3 and 4 in that fight. So it became very difficult to hit them because they were moving at super speed. And they could move across the map at the blink of an eye and hit you from across the corner. And then when I started seeing that you were struggling with that encounter, I kept the difficulty there. And I had that continue until later fights.
Yeah.
And even even so, I didn't just stick with the celerity option. When I started seeing that some of you were going into melee, we had that Fomori encounter where when you attacked them, they spat toxic blood out of their wounds. And you had to avoid that after every attack, and it made attacking the Fomori very risky. And then it ultimately culminated when we had our final boss against Talib Navid, who was a Banu Hakim serial Diablerist, who was Generation 6.
Yeah.
And that was a fight that all of you knew that if we mess up attacking this guy, it's going to be game over. One of us will die in the fight. And that was me trying to intentionally kill one of you in the game. And you guys managed to get through that fight fine. Because by that point, you guys were all super on edge. And we made it clear what Naveed could do. Because in an earlier scene, you saw him kill a Tremere before that fight had a chance to go into initiative. So
Yeah.
you knew how dangerous he was. Because the character in question he killed, Nozomi Nishiyama, was said to be America's strongest psyker. He was the strongest psychic in America. And Talib Navid, who was an assassin, killed him with the snap of his fingers.
That
So,
was him. Jesus. Wow.
yeah, Talib Navid.
Wow.
That,
Okay. And then we blew him up
that,
with an IED. Let's go, Bruja.
yeah. It's because you guys knew what you were getting into, so you were buying weapons and building weapons in advance. And Sylvester went into frenzy because of how much damage he took. And I remember Vigo was going into that fight very apprehensive because he knew if he missed any of his attacks, that was it. That was game over.
Yeah, we
So,
had to hit him, or else we all would have been fucked.
and then you entered the fight with Malcav, and that was a puzzle fight, and you lost the puzzle.
We did lose the puzzle. We were so used to brawn, we didn't use brain at all.
Yeah. So with the Werewolf game, the best way I could have gauged difficulty in the early part of that game was seeing how well you did against the Fomori in that first fight we were doing against Nostrum. Because I started seeing how easily Grim was killing enemies and how difficult Reynard was to hit, that I started adjusting combat according to that. So that was what inspired the Phyrektoi to be the next boss fight. And when I saw that Grim and Reynard both ganged up on him and made mincemeat out of what should have been a difficult fight, that was what inspired the fight with the Concertos, where now we're fighting enemies that have celerity and vicissitude, and they have very unique ways of attacking you. Where even though Grim killed two of them in, I think, three different punches, he almost died in that fight
Yeah.
because their damage values matched.
I had to burn a gnosis on him to heal him because he was looking really rough after that fight.
Yeah, he was fighting a Zemichi in Zula war form and almost got killed in one hit. If he did not roll high enough with his soak, that would have killed him in one hit.
Yeah. And so the thing is that werewolf encounters are super deadly. They have the snappiness of vampire combat where they rarely last more than like 5 turns, but they
And with
are lethal.
and I can't with even more fun ways of enemies fighting you. Because you remember that blue-haired Zemichi that jumped onto Elmira's back and started vicissituding into her body?
Hmm.
And I put you in a situation where it's not just damage rolls you need to worry about. It's, do you know enough of how to get this character out of this situation? Can I challenge you on a creative thinking level? And you were one turn away from that Zamichi getting to a point where you just could not hit it without directly harming Elmira and possibly killing her
Yep.
for doing that. Because really, Chico thought the best solution is that I'm just going to shoot you in the head with this gun and not try to make a swipe attack that's going to hurt Elmira. Because if he did that, I would have had Elmira take the same amount of damage.
Yeah, and that would have killed her too because Chica's actually
Yeah.
pretty strong.
Yeah, and if Grim came into that situation, that probably would have resulted in Elmira being killed.
Yeah, I would have been kind of sad about that because I like Elmira.
And seeing how well that how well that fight went, I said we're close, but not quite. I've got an idea for Grim. But Chico and Reynard are doing very well. We're going to take the difficulty up one more notch, and then we're going to keep that consistent for the rest of the game.
I'm gonna have to just
Uh,
hide in the Umbra and heal people. I'm gonna just be the
you're
medic.
gonna
That's cool.
you, you want to invest points in firearms?
That well, I mean, I kind of like the idea because I already know that the Theurge is kind of a medic. Just the fact that I can commune with the ancestors. I'm in charge of getting people's gifts. I have Mother's Touch. I have a lot of Gnosis to earn. Um, I kind of like the idea of Tyler being a party healer because at the end of the day, he just wants a pack to actually to be there for because he never really had one as a wandering rover.
And what I've done for your character specifically, it's because your character in universe has a strong hatred for the Glasswalkers.
Oh yeah.
So I'm doing everything I can to make the Glasswalkers look very appetizing for you. Where I'm trying to give you subliminal messages that maybe you want to take up guns, maybe you want to look into ranged options, maybe you want to get some bombs and fight like Ragnar did in our vampire game.
Yeah, I remember during that
Or
first. What's up?
or hell, you saw Maya Augustine before we entered the Black Fury cairn, and she had a bow and arrow.
Yep.
And you could start specking into archery and try your best as a Fianna to kowtow before the Black Furies and say, I'm sorry I have a penis, I'm sorry I have testicles, can you please train me in archery? And have
Yeah.
that be
The
and have that be a
I wrote
conversation
Tyler
starter.
way too prideful because one of the flaws I gave him was overconfidence. So he's not gonna let his pride get in the way of any of that, which is great for his character. How you wrote the encounters to come, because he's not gonna
And
give any ground.
and while it could work with you taking points in firearms, that could lead to you having a conversation with Chico Largo saying, I've never fired one of these before, how do you shoot this?
Yeah, that actually might be a good little character interaction too. I should keep that in mind.
And
But
you find out that your werewolf hand is too big for the tiny human revolver, and you have to like modify the gun just so you can shoot
I
it.
have to cut the trigger guard off. And then there is also
Extend the
in the
hand,
first
get like a
episode.
plank of wood.
Yeah, there was also like the first episode when what's the name of that glass walker that was there?
Benny Blue Box.
Yeah, when Vinny had that 3D printed rifle and was just tearing up the first agents, and I
Yeah.
looked over at Danny and I was like, I know what I want for Samhain.
Dear Jesus, please give me a new assault rifle for Christmas.
Yep, it's like Calvin and Hobbes. Dear Santa, I would like a nuclear warhead for Christmas.
And same thing goes when I was doing D&D with you guys, because that, I think you might have come in for the game during this part. Do you remember when we were playing Out of the Abyss and I had Vargas as a boss fight?
You had who?
I don't think you were there for that. Okay.
No, I came
There's
in
a
really
point.
late in the game.
This is like a bit of like a D&D point, but I feel like this is still useful to know as a storyteller. What you want to do in that is keep an eye on how your game. I'm sorry, my mind just went for a minute. Okay.
It's all good.
What the premise of Out of the Abyss is that in the middle of that game, there is a massive free-for-all fight between all the demon princes. And that ultimately decides who the main antagonist is going to be for the rest of the game. So we had back to back to back a boss fight with Demogorgon, Malkanthet, Dwargus, Orcus, and Juiblix. and all of those bosses are CR23 in that game.
Jesus.
So that was me putting my players through a gauntlet, and I remember how great it felt running that. Because Dwargus was a guy that every 50 hit points you knocked off of him, he gained a new damage resistance.
Oh, so it got real hard to fucking hit him.
Yeah, we had two warlocks in that party who were using Eldritch Blast. They very quickly realized they had to start using what little spell slots they still had.
Yeah, and also
And
that explains how you got the Wand of Orcus in that game.
and eventually our players were reaching in and using inventory items that they were sitting on since session one and just never felt the need to use. And that was pushing them to fight these guys in a way that involved creative problem solving. And that was a great session for me. I always look back on that fight fondly because I knew I pushed you guys to your limit and you really had to think about how you're going to get through that boss fight. I was very happy about that.
That sounds like a pretty stellar moment. When, but yeah, you kind of went over
Yeah.
all the other questions that I had when
Well,
you were talking.
let me look at some of these. Let me look at some of these too, because I don't know if I answered like all these.
Yeah,
Um, in terms of what I do in terms of story preparation, I don't do that much actually. I told you before when I was over at your place, it was in the car when I was with your sisters.
yeah,
The re I don't do that much planning when it comes to sessions, and that's because I started realizing I was getting bored with my own D&D sessions when I had everything planned out. And regardless of whether or not a player picks an option I wasn't thinking of, and now I have to get new battle maps and and figure out what I'm going to have a character say, and then rewrite the session in the middle of it. But it's more that if I knew where it was going, it started feeling it felt like I was doing chess piece storytelling, and I
yeah,
started making my games where I had a set objective as to what I wanted to accomplish for that session, and then I let the chips fall where they may.
yeah.
Because that Nosferatu encounter, that wasn't supposed to happen until two sessions later. And I decided to have it now because you're in a sewer, we have a few minutes left in the session, let's do it now. That's what that was.
Yeah, so that sort of flexibility within your own planning helped carve out some great moments for us. So it's good to have that level of flexibility. Like when it comes to planning, it's like my sister's girlfriend who runs the Storm King's Thunder game, because it's D&D, has to have like some exposition in order to help get everybody immersed in the setting. And while she does have like definitive endpoints stopped, it's ultimately up to us just like what we want to do for that. Going back to the amount of structure and freedom in a game. It also depends
Hmm.
on like the goal that you set for the player, and if they for the players, and if they get there or not is up to them.
Hmm. And whenever I run one of these games, whenever I ask you, am I doing well? And you answer, and do I go into any of these games with any stress? No. And that's because I'm just having a good time. I'm not trying to impress anyone. And if we have a good moment, that's good. If we have like a so-so session, that's fine because we're still having a good time. You guys are very vocal with me. You guys let me know whether or not you're having a good time with the games. And I can typically tell when I'm running a game if I'm going to lose a player. That's fine. If you're playing a game on Roll20, you're going to lose people. It's something that just happens on Roll20 because I do blame Roll20 for having a bit of a disconnect because you're talking to strangers, you're mostly anonymous. Most of these games happen in Discord. You can feel like you can just drop out of a game without any hassle. I had a player leave my Dungeon and Mad Mage game last week while I was in my visit with you, and I said, "Well, that's fine. It's Dungeon and Mad Mage. I don't expect that many people to be involved." But at the same time, don't let it tear you up if a player leaves, because that same player in question, I tried making a personal plot point for all my players in Dungeon and Mad Mage, and this was a guy that I would put a plot point in front of, and then he would refuse it. And it got to the point where I don't know what to do with you. I don't know what you want. I ask you what you want, and you don't give me an answer. So I just came to a conclusion ahead of time that he was eventually going to leave the game, and then when it did happen, I wasn't surprised.
Yeah. It's like
And
you can't cater to everybody.
yeah, and if a player's not cooperating with you, don't be afraid to say, I don't think this is going to work. You might want to leave the group and find another game that works out for you. And don't ever take it personally when that does happen, because, like I said, this just happens. Real life happens. You meet new people and you say goodbye to people every day. It's not something that unusual. Because
Yeah.
I remember I made the mistake of taking it too personal when I was running Out of the Abyss, which was the first proper module I ran as a dungeon master. Anyone who knows anything about D&D 5e says that's probably a bad idea for me to do, but I did anyway. And I remember I had one player that it became very clear to me after it all happened that she was just looking to cheat the entire game. But she was somebody that kept accusing me of railroading when I wasn't. Kept making like commentary about the game as I was playing it. And every session it ended, she seemed to just have a bulleted list of stuff she didn't like. But she said something along the lines of, well, don't run the game straight out of the module then, because it feels like railroading, and just do what feels natural to you. And then she says, next session, when I start doing something natural, I don't like homebrew and I don't like you add enemies. And at that point, I said, well, what the fuck do you want? I'm trying to please you and you just refuse to go along with it, so what do you want? And it ended with her leaving the session.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Again, you can't cater to everybody. And if somebody doesn't like the way you're going to run the game and everybody else does, then you're free to find a different game. The only thing is that, like, if the majority of people come to you and say, hey, there's a problem here, then you sort of have to work with that.
And I had two World of Darkness games that ended prematurely because of that. I tried running a game in Rage Across the Internet server, but all the players there sucked because I had one player there who kept making comments while I was in the middle of the game and just wanted to criticize the game as I was running it. The name might have rhymed with Andre, and along with that, the Theurge in it sent me a DM saying they didn't want to go through the whole negotiations of being a Theurge after I agreed with them before the game started that that's how we were running Theurge, because I would want that to be a very roleplay heavy game. And I ended up, and I read that and I thought, well, why the fuck did you volunteer to be the Theurge if you're not going to take the time to be the Theurge? And it just ended up with all these players where none of them were talking to me saying like, oh, your backgrounds, can you tell me about your backgrounds? Your resources, can you tell me about your resources? And I just started having a communication with these guys and none of them were interested in talking to me. And then the time I did have a conversation with two of them, it was the most NPC shit I ever had in my life. And I just canceled that entire game. I said, no, I'm not doing this. And I just left the server right after I canceled that game. And then I told you about the vampire game I tried running, where that game fell apart because we had a character we had a player who was openly racist, making racist remarks to one of the players.
Yeah, yeah. They were
Uh,
talking shit to, I think, the Russian player?
yeah, yeah, it was a
Yeah,
Russian guy who was racist against him for being Russian.
yeah. I
Yeah.
remember
I
I remember
know,
telling
I
me
know
about
there's a
that.
war going on, but that gives you no fucking excuse to say that shit. I remember his exact words. It was, "I can't wait for Zelensky and his army to get to your door so they can bomb you off the face of the earth."
Jesus.
Yeah, and I made it very clear to that guy that I'm not going to have that tolerate. You're going to apologize next session. And he said, not only am I not going to apologize, but I'm going to call you a pussy for not saying this to me in the middle of the session. When, no, you don't interrupt a session for that, like player or GM or storyteller, you don't do that. So I immediately kicked that guy from the game. But it turns out he was in the DMs, and he ended up bringing two of the other players with him, and I just canceled the game after that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like,
Same with bigots. I'm
it's
not going to play this
it's
game at all.
it's a game. It's a game. We're here to have fun.
Yeah.
The story's supposed to be an escape from the drama of real world. Sure, and like we said, you go ahead and put real events in the game just to add some immersion into the setting. But yes, look, I support the freedom of Ukraine as much as anybody, but for God's sakes, don't hate the people of a country just because a couple of politicians wanted to have a war. Okay, that's not their
Just
fault.
off, like side note, like you need to make a distinction between soldier and citizen whenever you're talking about that.
Yeah. So yeah, you.
As did the U.S. Army do a bunch of shit in the Middle East? Yes. Was I there personally during the Gulf War or the War on Terror? No. So don't talk to me about that.
Yeah. It was
Yeah.
not. It was none of my doing. Anyway, uh,
Mm.
So yeah, so
Looking
you
at
say you don't did a
looking
whole
through
lot
these.
of script writing.
No, I
Um,
don't.
so what about? But I know we did the whole character jam a little while ago. So what would you say your process is when it comes to developing your characters within a story, and how much scripting do you do for them?
I have very set goals for what I want to accomplish with Tyler, Grimm, and Reynard during the course of the Werewolf game. And I'm still in limbo about what I want to do with Chico and Elmira at the point of this episode.
Yeah,
And
I meant more so
I
for the
just
NPCs that you write.
yeah. Well, I came to a conclusion about what I was going to do with Elmira last night, but going off about NPCs, usually I just have them there because I don't want them going into scenes and initiating conversations because that's when you start going down the path of darkness, the road of darkness, where you start having NPCs control the plots instead of the players.
And it becomes fan
Because
fiction.
exactly, because you remember the NPC that stole the show when every scene he appeared in was Grisha Vsevlad in our vampire game.
Yeah.
And that character, I put him in that game specifically to scare you guys. Where, for context of those who don't know, that is a Zamichi who turned himself into a literal dragon with the body parts of dead vampires and dead people who he just saw as property and formed a dragon body out of it, and then would peel himself out of that dragon body and walk around as a normal human in his haven. But every time my players met him, he was in dragon form and he refused to be seen in his normal form, quote unquote. And every time they had a phone call with him, it felt like a life and death scenario because this is a Zamichi. This is a guy who is one bad day away from breaking the masquerade. This is a guy that we know we can't win a head-on fight with, and we need to be very careful about everything we say. And I'll typically make characters specifically to instill emotions in you.
Yeah, like any phone call with Grisha felt like a hostage negotiation. And then when we met him, we found out why, and it's because he's a fucking dragon.
And you're looking at him, and Vigo in particular, the Zamichi that you saw carrying so many fight encounters, was scared of this guy when he entered the room with him. And that's such good context as to how dangerous Grisha was as a character.
Yeah, I really enjoyed him as a character. I thought he was great as, and he also wound up being a companion, an invaluable companion at that.
Yeah, because it was thanks to him that the final boss was made a little bit more possible.
Yes,
Because he tanked one of the hits for the party so they could close in.
and he did a fantastic job being a meat shield. God bless you,
It,
Grisha.
yeah, it almost killed him, and that once again, Banu Hakim, they don't fuck around.
No, they don't. They like I said, they're the TX of the vampires.
And sometimes I'll put a character in a game just so I can have a conversation in regards to either something that's been on my mind at the time or something I want to explore about the world of darkness. Because you remember the encounter we had with Malkav at the end.
Yes.
And that was setting up the next game in the world of darkness. Where if you fought him, if you solved the puzzle, that would have been great. But the way that conversation ended, it was me bringing up a theme that was going to carry on into our werewolf game, where the werewolf game is about freedom and agency. And Amalkov is a guy who believes that there should be no structures of power, no institutions, no governments, nothing that contains power or laws. That it all needs to be abolished and all men need mandatory freedom. You will have nothing and you will be happy and you will be able to take whatever you want with your own two hands. And by that, I fully intend on meaning that you are killing your neighbor just so you can have enough food to survive for the next night, because I believe that's better than obeying the laws of another person.
Yeah, so
And
he takes it to he takes unrestricted anarchy to its logical conclusion that eventually somebody's gonna rise up from the ashes of that and consolidate enough power where it basically nullifies his whole point. How that's going to happen is
I
beyond me.
because I did that because the anarchs for a majority of that vampire game were the main villain. And I was looking at their antediluvians, and Ilyes, who's the Brujah Antediluvian just doesn't match the values of the Anarch movement at all, but Malkav does. And that's why I made him the villain of that game. And why I eventually brought him into Werewolf is because this is the libertarian ideology taken to an insane extreme, where I'm going to be so free that I will have nothing to secure me if things don't go my way, where I'm forced to only ever depend on myself, and what exactly that kind of dystopia would look like. That if we were to take BioShock, for example, and everyone had the power of Frank Fontaine.
Yeah, well, I mean, then you wind up when the Rapture winds up the same way it was either way.
Yeah. You have all these Frank Fontaines killing each other and siding with each other, all based off of a very thin veil of trust where at any moment your friends can kill you in your sleep. And it's ultimately just a Darwinist nightmare where nothing can prosper because everyone's too wrapped up in themselves to focus about on any collective or any goal that requires teamwork.
Exactly. It's like the whole reason society formed is that humans have a natural instinct to like try and help each other to an extent. At least when it
And
comes to like your family and closest friends, and then you form a society that way.
and one of our favorite characters in our Friday game, our Spelljammer game, Istis. If you heard that name and you thought, is that the Greyhawk goddess of time? Yes, it is.
She threw us into a fight
Uh,
with the Xerixians. I was like, a little more warning would have been nice.
but a part of that character is the meta plot I was telling in that Greyhawk game, the war against heaven and hell. She was a neutral party who was bought by heaven to work with them, and she has a very distinct view as to what destiny is supposed to be. She says it would all be better if we had predetermined lives that played out this way, and knowing what our destiny is going to be will make us happy, even if we're going to live a destitute life of poverty, or we know we're going to die in a brutal way, it'll be better if we all just stuck to the way we are supposed to live. And our the villain of a previous game, who became an ally in this game, and was the former player character Misfortune, heavily disagrees with that and believes that every man should be in charge of their own destiny. And why I have Istis in the game is because she represents an ideological battle where it's giving the players a question as to, do you believe in the idea of destiny? And if destiny does exist, do you think destiny should exist? And if you can't fight your destiny, what are you going to do about it? And behold, there are the themes of Lives Xerxes as I modified it.
Yep, and we are about to reach that end game momentarily, as it turns out.
Yeah, one of our final bosses is happening this week.
Yeah, one of. Fuck. Oh boy, that's gonna be a little rough. Not gonna lie, it's a little rowdy. Shit. Uh,
I remember you also wanted to ask me about experience points.
yeah. Well, oh wait, did I? Where did I write that down at?
No, we haven't properly answered that question. So when I ran Vampire for the first time, I supercharged all of you. The highest amount of experience points you ever want to give in a game is 5, and that's like after a major boss fight happens. You typically only want to give like 2 or 3 at a time whenever you do a session. And I think one more thing I want to say before I think we might have run out of things to say in the video. If a player is absent, just run the game. You don't need every single person to be available in the game, and I also think it's irresponsible to delay a game if somebody is missing. If it's the final session of a game, if you're in the final boss, then please do have everybody present because they want to be a part of that. I played Dungeon of the Mad Mage as a player, and the GM ran the game without a druid that had been part of that game since floor 6 of 23, and I couldn't. And their disappointment was made very known to the GM after that session ran. You don't want to do that when it's the finale, but if it's just a normal day-to-day session, and if you know you're going to do something that's not that important, do run the game anyway. And it's because people are playing their entire day around that session. And if I've taken, uh, this is like an extreme case, a day off of work only to learn that my game has been canceled, then it's going to feel like the day I took off was wasted.
Yeah,
If
and then you
if that
won't be able to
happens.
get that back. Like scheduling is very important when it comes to this because like my Storm King's Thunder game is a real life game I play with my sisters and her brother and a friend of his, and we have to like set aside a whole day to do it. And also my Curse of Strahd game, which I play immediately after my Friday games, that we have to like schedule it a couple weeks in advance because the game isn't everything. Yes, it's fun and you should be obliged to be there because you're a part of it. You can't let it get in the way of things you need to do in real life. Most people are pretty understanding about that. Like if you have an event or if you have work or if you have an emergency come up, it's as a storyteller you need to be courteous about that.
And speaking of your sisters, we started a server that was based in Eberron. And that's just going to be a game that we can run it if we can run it week by week.
Yeah.
I know that Saturday can be a busy game for some of your players. Well, I say like it's your group. No, like the games that you're a part of.
Yeah.
That's just if we can pull this off, we can pull it off. But
Yeah.
we're not too worried about that.
Yeah, I'll
But
talk to them
that's
about
still
it.
the-
We'll get them on board.
But that's still the case in point is that you have to prepare for these in advance. And if one guy can't do it, don't screw over everyone else in the group if one person can't attend it. And even if that happens, well, behold, you can just run a one-shot. I know that's very difficult to do with World of Darkness because of how
Tight the games are.
yeah, and it's more about how difficult it is to make a sheet. That's why we made an episode about sheet creation in that little character creation jam that we did. But that's also not that big of an issue because take the characters, put them in a different scenario. Say we have a game that's taking place in New York. I'm not picking you up. You're in London now. Well, let's have a game that takes place here. And it's just a little like
It's kind of
Naruto
jarring.
filler episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where say this is something that happens here. It's not going to affect the canon of the game. I remember what your aggravated health levels are. I'm going to write these down. I'm going to have them off to the side. Reset your values for now. We're not gaining XP for this. Just run it and just go natural with it.
Yep.
Because after all, these games are improv theater at the end of the day.
They are, and that's part of the reason I like them so much, is because they're very theatrical.
I've been talking for almost 2 hours. I think I'm out of things to say.
Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoyed. This is a little demystifying episode on what it means to be a storyteller and how to be a storyteller.
I know it wasn't structured. I know that a lot of it was just me and Kyle going back and forth, but hopefully this gets you out of your shell and like the way we've been talking about it casually, this isn't a hard thing to do. You can just do it.
Yeah.
And if you have any questions, you can ask them in the comments. Me and Kyle we're frequently online. We'll see it.
Yep.
And I say it like we're going to get a comment. Hopefully we do. Fingers crossed.
Well, yeah. Well, don't worry. I'm good at advertising. People will know. If you build it, they will come.
And am I going to have a Discord server? No, I'll just talk to you on YouTube. But it really isn't that difficult. Just do it. And you might fall on your face the first time, but nobody's perfect the first time around.
Yeah, you
You
won't.
just gotta keep doing this until you'll eventually reach a level you're comfortable with.
Yeah, you won't know until you try. And there's no shame in messing up if it's your first time, because everybody needs to learn. All
If
right.
it's with your friends or with strangers, whatever.
Gather some people, grab a couple of beverages, and play some tabletop. Yeah.
All right.
Good night.
And I think that's it.
Yeah.
All right.
Good night, everybody.